Ladies and gentlemen, let's get ready to rumble!
This Saturday night, March 22nd, 2025 at 9:15 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, I am scheduled to engage in my first public moderated debate. The topic for the discussion is going to be, is Sola Scriptura biblical? Now, I'm going to be engaging with a young, I assume, Eastern Orthodox man that I encountered on X, who goes by the name of Jeff Klein. As many of the followers of the blog have discovered over the years, I tend to do a bit of trolling on the social media platforms, and well, it looks like I caught a live one. This is essentially how I established my infamy online, and it's how I was introduced to the world by David Smalley. And while that particular interaction has slipped through the cracks of the internet, my interaction with philosopher Alex Malpass is still available, as is my interaction with Ben the Amateur Exegete. Now, to his credit, Jeff did try to interact with my content, but he doesn't seem to understand the point that I was making. He only points out the fact there's disagreement, but then doesn't offer any means by which to settle any such disagreements that might arise, as he demonstrates about the hour and a half mark in the video, where he says no one agrees on what the rule is, as if that has anything to do with the argument I was making in the video he's critiquing, even though the point he is critiquing I made in another video. Now, in his defense, he did step away and let YouTube run in autoplay, which allowed me to actually argue my case more completely without interruption. With that being said, where will I be making my stand as the defender of the proposition that Sola Scriptura is biblical? Given the constraints of time, which will be a 4-minute opening statement, I won't be able to present a developed case. So that will have to occur in the discussion that we have. But my thesis is simple: Scripture itself is the witness to the principle of sola scriptura. The primary and sole example that I'll be able to offer in my opening comes from Christ himself, who in Matthew 22 did not appeal to his own authority, even though he had divine right to do so, nor to tradition, nor to any magisterial authority. Instead, he appeals to Scripture. Now, that point necessarily reveals something about Judaism in the first century. While it had its traditions, those traditions ultimately stood or fell based upon their foundation. The Sadducees, who only saw the Pentateuch as authoritative because there was no explicit statement about the resurrection in there, denied it. And in Matthew 22, we have their chief argument against the resurrection stated as something of a reductio. Now, the possible response will be that Matthew's gospel wasn't written until some time later. But that doesn't change the fact that Exodus existed, and it's from there that Jesus refutes his opposition. Not only that, Jesus invokes it as the very present testimony of God to an audience that's separated by almost 1,000 years from the event described. And he does so based on the tense of the verb. Now, if you want to read my full opening statement, you can see it linked in the description below. So, how do I expect that Jeff will attack the proposition? He's already given me some insight into this by posting some slides on X, but for some reason, uh, I don't know whose fault it is, they didn't immediately show up in my replies. But I eventually got around to responding to them in the most appropriate way possible. I expect him to attack my position on three bases. One, the basis of canon. Two, the interpretational authority. And three, the method of interpretation. Let's very quickly break this down. The issue of canon, that is, what books are in the Bible, in my opinion, depends on what one believes the Bible to be, as well as what one considers the canon to be. Is the canon an authoritative list of books or a list of authoritative books? The answer ultimately depends on where the adjective authoritative is placed. If the list is authoritative, then it assumes that whatever made the list has such authority to do so. If that's the case, it definitely begs the question of where such authority is derived from. The question both involves epistemic as well as ontological establishments of authority. Moreover, it begs the question of why one work over another is chosen or why one work is rejected outright. The existence of competing canons across church history seems to undermine this assertion. The second line of attack will be in regard to interpretational authority. Who has not only the right to interpret Scripture, what it means, but also to make application of it? Here again, the issue of epistemology comes into play. Moreover, the problem is amplified by the fact there is no single interpretation of any passage of Scripture that's offered by either the Roman or Orthodox churches. In fact, there's multiple interpretations of the same passage. There's one fact that needs to be answered. Who determines not only how Scripture is to be interpreted, but by what means? A few years ago, I briefly walked through the various methods of interpretation employed historically by the ancient church, some of which were quite inventive. In being so inventive, they often undermined the text's own plain meaning. It also meant that the interpreters themselves have to be interpreted in light of their own particular context and the circumstances whereby they are making a response. There's an interesting video on Jeff's YouTube on Orthodox Christianity, and in it are many claims that are echoed by Rome. My challenge to Jeff, and similarly to any Roman Catholic, how do you know that your beliefs go all the way back to the apostles? And I mean all of them. Now, the video says that the Orthodox value Scripture, but then it also says it values the church fathers and calls them their guidebook. Now, while I believe the fathers are important and valuable, I also recognize they are not the authority on how the Scriptures are to be interpreted because they have to be interpreted. So, in my interactions with Socinians, for example, they will often abuse the church fathers for their own ends, twisting the statements of the fathers against one another. I'm reminded of the quote, and I forget who said it, in one controversy where in the debate, the person says, I can quote my fathers against yours, and yours against mine. Let us turn to what we hold in common, the Scriptures, to settle the matter. Whoever said this quote, if I'm even remembering it correctly, then it demonstrates that sola scriptura is the all sufficient and authoritative means for settling theological controversy. There's no doubt Jeff will say, but they interpret it as such and in this way. And indeed, they do. But then let's turn together and walk through the text and see if that understanding is correct. When the Scriptures are the standard by which the matter is to be settled, then it assumes that there is a right and a wrong way that the text is to be understood and subsequently applied in one's life. That means if you don't accept it, it's not the Scripture's fault. As I go forward from here for Saturday night, I humbly ask for prayers, for wisdom and patience, and a clear mind as I engage in this debate. Let me hear what is said, and let me be able to give a defense for what I believe. Well, that's all for this video. If you enjoyed it, please be sure and hit that like button. If you found it interesting and informative, please share it with your friends. And if you're not already subscribed, please be sure and hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to ring that notification bell. And until next time, friends, God bless.